So I have the signer V key hash using the Cardano CLI key hash command. And there you have it. But you mentioned that this should be the same as my sender value, the one that I have here. I didn't get that part.
When you let's just look at the latest error here to put this work in context. So if you throw those environment variables into the terminal and then you try to run this build function, what do we see?
Yeah.
Hey, Mick.
Okay. So yeah, same error as PBL access token must return to sender.
Right. I think I might be a moment behind on what I'm seeing on the screen, but it's about to come through here.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay, so it's good, right? You're building a balanced transaction and we're getting a specific Plutus error. Now, that error, let's look at the Plutus code itself. So do you have the repo open and you can find this validator in VS Code?
Yeah. So I have it from the script itself. I've not put it in the output folder. I have it in the set script folder.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
and we want to look
accessing
at
from that folder, right?
we want to look at the source code. Yeah, we want to look at the source code. So the source folder, the faucet validator script.
Okay. Are you seeing it?
Yep. So when you look at that error message, scrolling up just to the top of the validator, the error message we got was PPBL 2022 access token must return to sender, right?
Must return. That's right.
That's what we saw.
Yeah.
And so let's look at the logic of this output has access token function. So scrolling down to where we find that logic, output has access token.
Access token. Yeah, there you go.
Right. So it says, look at the value of the value that's going to the receiver and make sure that it has this access token in it, right? At least one.
Right, right.
Value to receiver is defined in the function above this on lines 82 and 83.
Yes.
It's the value paid to the receiver, pub key hash in the info. And that's why on line 73 and 74, we're defining receiver pub key hash. Right. Oh, and this is in, it's in the redeemer. Right. Okay. Okay, this is helpful to me. What we missed is it looks like you're signing it correctly, but we need to we need to get the right pub key hash in the redeemer here. And I bet that's going to fix it for us.
So here in the redeemer,
yeah, the redeemer example has a pub key hash right there. Let's
and the bytes colon.
yes. Yeah, just
Okay.
replace that byte string with your pub key hash, the one that you're using in the README file.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. So let's save this.
And let's see if that makes all the difference.
Yeah, let's give it a try.
But James, don't we want to serialize that pubkey hash to byte a string? Because normally,
Is it not already?
no,
Should be,
that's a hash. That's not byte a string.
Let me
but
look
the
at
type definition says bytes already.
yeah,
We'll
I
keep that
well,
in hex.
Let's give it a go and see
So
whatever
by
we
mean the
get.
bytes, I mean everything should be numbered there, not the letters.
no, I think it works in this format. Yeah.
Well,
So
there-
this
right.
worked.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
estimated transaction fee, Lovelace.
Yeah.
So the problem was with the redeemer.json file, right? It has
Yes.
to match. That's where it has to match. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think the rest I can do.
And the pattern here for everybody, right? And this is how I trace every error like this, right? If I see that error in the terminal, I find it in my validator and then just backwards. Okay, where was this defined? Okay, where was this defined? And by taking that backwards process, it jumped off the page at us to say, okay, well, the redeemer's wrong. We need to get that right value in here somewhere.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Thanks, James.
Thanks for your patience
So
with that one,
how
sir.
do
I'm glad you got it.
Yeah, yeah. Took me 3 days. So thank you. Yeah, how do I
Roberto was saying
unshare my Zoom screen now?
yeah, you can unshare. Roberto was saying last week that it takes it, he goes from 3 days to accomplish something to then like 20 minutes on the same task. And that's how we're measuring progress.
Yeah,
Hopefully we're all picking up.
as long as as long as we make progress.
That's right. That's right.
Yep. Thanks again.
You bet. Hey, Nicholas. So I dropped 2 more things into the agenda today. I wanted to think together about the current list of approval processes that are published right now on GPTE. And then I wanted to share a little proof of concept that's not quite an implementation of CIP 68, but that is a step in that direction. And I wanted to share that with everybody just to see what it gets you thinking about. Oh, Nicholas, this seriously a core value for Gimbal Labs is to move at a human pace. Okay, so it's good to have you here whenever you're here, man. And yeah, there's always going to be time to get caught up. We got you. So what I'm going to do first, I'm not gonna rush into taking notes on this yet because we're recording this session. But if we get to the point where it feels right to write a few things down, we can. Just in case you haven't seen it, we've got the GPTE live on pre-production. And this is not quite the desired state yet because we're still using the Plutus V1 contracts. Trevor gave me a little nudge last week and said, hey, let's put something out there, even if it's not on mainnet, just so we can start sharing it and it becomes a little bit more real. So I appreciated that push. So this is live. You can see the test ADA and the test gimbals in the treasury. What I'd love to do tomorrow, if we make some progress on these 2 agenda points today, is to look critically at these bounties and make sure they say the right things and that they're clearly enough written. And we can also think about what's missing from this list and add to it together. So that's, I think, coming up tomorrow. The reporting and data is working. There's all of this unformatted or minimally formatted data that's just waiting for us to go in and make it into something beautiful. I know that a few people have been playing around with that already. And then there's this how it works page, which I think is going to be really helpful for communicating what's going on here. And so anybody who's been in conversations around marketing and messaging at Gimbal Labs, I hope that this can serve as the beginning of some collateral towards those goals. Probably a little bit more wordy than a general audience will want it, but I hope that we're getting some key ideas across to people, how this thing works, kind of the values of Gimbal Labs that we're trying to express. The concept of headless dApps that was introduced in the course, and I think we all have a lot that we can learn together. The roles that we have so far, and calls to action. So this is all here, and any feedback you all have is really helpful. Let's make sure that this is telling the best possible story about what's going on. But I had a gratifying moment on Monday, just kind of making these calls to action here, because almost everything except for the tutorials and a consultation button, these are live links to real things. We've got a real Plutus PBL course. We've got some work we've done collectively on contributor tokens. We have the source code for this project, and we have this meeting right here. And so it feels really good to be building on something substantial. And now together, we got to make it as good as it can be, as open as it can be, apply these concepts to tokenomics and to governance. And that's why I wanted to talk about approval processes today. This is our entry point to together thinking about governance, not by trying to create a top-down system that's going to work perfectly the first time it's ever deployed, but by going to the finest point of decision making. Specifically, when do we decide that a project is complete, right? Or to go back to the diagram, when does transaction 3 happen, right? When the project is complete, the contributor receives their project token and their contributor token back. Who decides? Who approves that the work is actually done? That's governance. It's small scale governance. It's targeted and it's specific. And my hypothesis is that by working on this together, we can have some insights about the bigger systemic things, the scalable parts. So I'm suggesting 5 approval processes, each of which has a number 1 through 5 that can then be used in any project description. So you could see approval process 2 or 4. I think there's a 5 here somewhere. There's a 3, right? So these will be processes that we can talk about. And I think it's fair to assume that these are going to change over time. We're going to learn about these. We're going to find out that some of them don't belong in this list. We're going to find new ones that were missing from the list. We're going to find better ways to describe them. So take a moment just to read what's here so far. And what do you think? How do you see anything that's clearly missing from this list? Are there any of these that you would push back against, or do you have clarifying questions about any of these? And I'll drop this link in the chat just in case you need it. Mix, what do you think?
I'm thinking about the approval process. I mean, in my opinion, should be something measurable, not something unknown. So by measurable, something that maybe it is on-chain or off-chain. At least some for verification of that process, for example, process 1 or 2 or I don't know 5, something I think would be better or more transparent, more clear, so we can measure it by something like, I don't know, a transaction happen, that's very clear, instead of something unknown, like, for example, group approval or group consent. What does it mean? I mean, how much of that group, I mean, people should be in that group in what context? I mean, from where exactly? How many from that project? How many from community? Should we, for example, Gimbal Lab have a representative inside that group so Gimbal Lab can somehow supervise the process? So then it will do the verification or the approval of, for example, level 4 or level 3. If the group, by the group, people, the category of peoples or the quality of the peoples, like who's going to be the developer? Are all of them should be developer? Some of them should be, how many of them? Or the quantity of them. But I think that's, yeah, we can discuss about that in that approach. But I think it would be easier and more better for approval if we have something to measure and very directly and very clear and transparent. And if it is on-chain, very good. But if it is even off-chain, okay, fine.
And the reason you're saying for getting good at measuring these things is that if we are able to measure well, then it's going to be more efficient and even possible to automate these processes.
And we can know if, for example, the measurement is low, okay, we know that this is low, we need to improve it. For example, maybe we need more approval process, or we need to break down approval process at level 3 to 2 or 3 again process. But if it is something unknown or something unmeasured, I think if it is, we cannot calculate that. We cannot even improve or even decrease some of them. For example, maybe now 5 is too much, maybe 2 is enough, or maybe 10 is enough, 5 is less.
Right.
So
well, those numbers, yeah, the numbers, if one person was sitting in a room right now writing a white paper, they would pull a number out of their ass and they would write that number in the white paper.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
What we're going to do, we're going to experiment. We're going to experiment and find out what those numbers should be over time, right?
Yeah.
So that's the critical approach here. So a couple of questions. One thing I'm hearing is that if we have groups, if we have approval groups, we will over time need to define, well, who's in that decision-making group? How big is the group? What are the qualities of the people there? And then then there's this evidence piece. You mentioned on-chain evidence. Let's come back to that in just a moment. One question I have is a merge request on GitLab or a PR on GitHub sufficient to be evidence of one kind of approval?
Yeah, I think that's really good, in my opinion, because we can even take the hash, the commit hash or the merge hash, and put it as a metadata or even the datum inside the on-chain.
That's really good, right? So we'll have the hash of the task itself that's just we're using Blake 2B right in the front end to get, a hash. There might be better ways to do that, but then you can also have the hash of the merge request for the work itself.
And by measurable, I mean something like this. I don't mean some number, very direct number. No. I mean something like this. We can measure it. We can really see it and inside the code or some kind of data transferring from a step 2 to a step 3. So if there is this hash, this merge hash exists, okay, we know we don't need any approval from a human or someone else. We just know it, it's there. And anyone can verify that.
That's really what I'm asking though. Okay, so yes, at the end of the day, the final completion of the work is, did it get added to a public repo? Or just to add some other examples, right? Maybe a simple task is adding timestamps to a live coding video. Did those timestamps get added to YouTube, right? So there will be tangible evidence for many of these things. Was documentation written, for example? The reason I originally placed approval, right, merge request approval at kind of a lower level, the most difficult order moving. I think there are cases where we might want more than just the maintainer of a repo to approve a merge request. And we might want multiple voices to say, yeah, that thing that you built is sufficient, okay? And just to have an example in mind. An example, I don't know if all these are the right numbers yet, so let me find, like this one, okay? Creating an interface for the issuer to distribute completed projects. It uses the words, right? Where did I, and these still need to be better. Not all the details are here. But something like this, that's gonna be used by multiple different people. I think there's a lot of opinions that you could possibly express in the implementation of some distributor interface, or certainly in documentation. Right.
But I think we can in GitHub or GitLab, we can see the contribution level of people that they are doing. For example, in which day they were committing or how much they were active.
Yeah. We can see the evidence. We can see, well, that's the question for everybody here, right? We may find out that nothing more than approval processes 1 or 2 are ever going to be necessary. We might find out that group approval is unnecessary, but I don't think we will. I think there are certain kinds of projects where you don't want just the maintainer of the repo saying, yeah, this is done, or no, it's not. You might want multiple people, and it might not be a very high number. Maybe it's just 2 or 3. Maybe there are cases where it is 10, like you said, so this is really, yes, there are measurable things. Yes, a merge request or any Git activity is easy to measure. That part's trivial. But are there cases where the scope of the project and the outcomes we're thinking about ought to have multiple deciders saying, yes, I think I approve that work got done.
The thing is, at least in my opinion, but I really like to know your ideas, guys, about since the project we are talking about our code, I think any kind of decision making based on that, we can do some kind of measurable approach to that, because the project is code. The project is not some non-profit, I don't know, humanitarian charity or something. Since everything here is code and the whole process of these bounties again is code and everything is very measurable, I think even in that situation of multiple person try what they want to decide, again, we can think of a process that's measurable or at least predictable, that we can know if the person with this authority can have this much of access and this limit of decision making. For example, a person at the level of 3 can decide at level of 3, not 4 or 5 or vice versa or something. That's I think my personal view, but I really like to know you guys about this. What kind of cases, although everything is here is code and all the bounties again is code, improvement is a code here. We are talking about just sure there is a user experience. We can survey people about that. That's is important. Maybe there is a, for example, an improvement in the interface, but and it's really good inside the code and it's merge request, but the user, they don't like it. I mean, it doesn't look good, or there are some problem with that user interface. So yeah, we need some kind of off-board or off-chain feedback to that, and maybe that would be important for decision making, in my opinion. But what do you think? Can we do something measurable since everything we are talking about is code or not?
Well, so if everything was code, I would agree with you more, but not everything is code. Think about a bounty like this one, for example. Create a video guide for how to set up a GPTE instance. And this is documentation. This is video making, for example. And maybe just one person could say, yeah, that video is good enough. But this is an example where I'm suggesting maybe we go with some kind of asynchronous group approval. Maybe a couple of people need to watch that and say, either give their feedback and say, hey, this part was unclear. Can you edit that part? Or they say, okay, this is excellent. This is a great video documentation. It's subjective.
So approval process, the number 3, it means it's once from 1 to 3 or 3 approval out of 5. I mean, what is the number front of approval process means? What exactly, James?
Oh, it's just an encoding. This could be A, B, C, D, E, right? I just use the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to have a shorthand for referencing each of these. So approval process number 3 is this.
So it is possible a bounty just needs 3 approval, 3 process, doesn't need 5, or a bounty needs 2 only, like a merge request would be enough.
Yes, okay. So going back, this is a good clarifying question. Whoa, sorry. Goodness gracious. My mouse just went haywire. On each of these, it says approval process 2, or approval process 4, or approval process 3. Okay. What that number right here means is it's a reference to one of the 5 items in this list. And maybe for clarity, I'm recognizing maybe I should change these to letters or something. A, B, C, D, E, if those numbers are getting in the way of understanding. Now, these are project parameters. And by placing one of these numbers in the markdown file, it then feeds the description. Okay, so here, because the number 4 is in the markdown, this part is just grabbed from the list of approval processes. So the bounty is implement something. The approval process is live group consent, which means do this. Okay, and so there's going to be a one-to-one mapping of approval processes to tasks. And that's what we're talking about here. So given that every bounty will have exactly one approval process selected from a list of possible approval processes, what should that set of approval processes consist of as we start this work?
And this group approval, any of these 3 are token. I mean, like we are going to create that gatekeeper contract because of this, right?
Okay, right. This takes us to the next thing, right? Is that a prerequisite to using these processes? I don't think so, but if people disagree, let's make it even more urgent to build it. I believe it's urgent to build that as soon as possible, and to have, to be registering approval with an on-chain event as soon as we can build it. But I also think it's worth it to think through what the system is, so we build the right thing when we do start. I'm going into the chat. Sarah says, should the project manager have the final say? Yeah, maybe, right? So there's this issuer of a treasury who lists tasks or projects. And I would like to tomorrow look at the concept of how even defining the projects themselves, it can be a centralizing point, right? That's an expression of power to write what the tasks are in the first place. And maybe there's ways that we can share that power and responsibility. But I think that there's always going to be tasks where, yeah, it's sufficient. Whoever wrote the tasks in the first place, they're the issuer, or I think it's fair to call them the project manager, right? There's going to be cases where, yeah, it's as simple as saying, yeah, that's done. And I think that approval process number 2 is going to always have a place. My question is that always sufficient? Is it always enough to have just one project manager saying, yeah, that's done? Or is it worth considering cases where we need multiple people who have a stake in some project to approve of it?
I would like to know anyone who were inside the software development process, CI/CD, and what was their experience about this. Like if they wanted to talk about a feature about their application, what was the process? It was a democracy or dictatorship? The project managers say this is, and we all do it, or no? It was a voting about feature. Does anyone have any experience in software development process?
It depends on the deadline. If you have time, the developers fight against the product manager. If not, it works like maybe you do what they say, or you do submarines, which is to just make what you want anyway, and until it works, and then they cannot be against.
See.
Urgent deadlines are always the friend of centralizers and dictatorships.
Yep. Crunching people with some excuses.
If we
What's
can,
better
we
than
can
time?
That's why
create some
most
artificial
projects start with the
urgency.
deadline, not with the goal.
Well, and so we get to question that. And maybe by really engaging with these questions, we might all decide that the world is working perfectly, exactly as it is. But I have a feeling that the reason a lot of us are here is because there's something that we can imagine might be better. And as such, don't we have to question, like, okay, the project management regime that got Web 2 in all of its urgent glory to the place where it is right now, is that the best way to do things? I'm wondering if it's not. And I'm not saying always. We can have space for that decision-making process, right? We can approve it. It got done. What I'm asking is, what else, if anything, do we want to try to build organizations where groups of people are invited to say that work got done? I'm not hearing much support for these options yet, though. So maybe we discard them. Maybe we do rely on those Web 2 models, but I don't think that's what we're here for.
So if we want to go with the path of democracy, or at least as you are saying, the approval of from M out of N, should we just consider the number, the approval of M out of N, or no, we should somehow introduce a reputation too? For example, if someone have the completion token of PBPL, doesn't that person have better opinion or more, let's say, voting power comparing to someone doesn't know anything about Plutus or something, but still he is inside that group and he wants to have a vote to approve a project or a quality of the project that it's done? Maybe even the issuer, for example, because not all the issuer, for example, the issuer wants just a video. He's not a coder or developer. But if there is a group approval, the issuer has a one vote, and the developer who finished PPPL have one vote too. I'm sure there are other people too. Shouldn't in base some of the cases, although it's democracy, it's voting power, maybe some people have higher voting power or not. Every person should be equal, no matter what their background is.
Yeah.
And we should just care about the number, like M out of N.
No, I think this is critical. And thanks. That's a good reminder. You're right. Yeah, defining, hey, who has access to being an approver? How do you earn that? That's, to me, a really critical question. And we can look at that together. And maybe there's levels to that, right? And so keeping in mind that this DApp itself can be reinstantiated with different parameters each time, there might be different instances where different sorts of approval processes are emphasized. And there might be different parameters to who's in the approver group in the first place. And so, and also noting these three options are inefficient, right? Anything that requires live group consent is bounded by how often we can run a live coding session, for example. But what happens at live coding, ideally, is we have this chance to kind of share in exposure to different ideas and using that as an educational tool. So so think about how participating in some of these group approval processes is itself a form of capacity building. And so I would want, the initial instance, maybe there are not yet rules around who's in that group. It's just whoever shows up. So what, there's 12 people here right now. We could say at the start of a call, 7 of 12 have to approve, or nobody has to object. Consent is a little bit more efficient than approval, because people don't actively have to put their thumb up. They just have to not put their thumb down to achieve consent. And I think that's a really interesting thing for us to look at. Yeah.
But James, what about bringing quadratic voting inside this group approval instead of just the normal majority rule style of code voting?
Weighting people's different levels of contribution thus far to a system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that, for example, if a person finished a bounty already, he has more weight to say this and future bounty are finished or completed all, because he has the experience or she has the experience, and there is a weight to that. I think
The more I've contributed to other tasks, the more my approval is weighted.
Exactly.
Does that raise red flags for anybody? I tend to like that idea, but I wonder what I'm not noticing, or what unintended consequences could emerge from something like that.
But the consequences of centralization of approval power to an individual who is very talented, and he, after some time, like let's say 6 months or 1 year, he's too heavy to be dealt with.
Yes,
That
that happens a lot in academic institutions. I mean, you get the early professors get easily ahead, and then they just stall the progress of research grants and funding, because they become the bottleneck. And so there is no good way to rotate them afterwards.
What about introducing expiration date to that weight or to that power?
That seems to work. That's what universities do with emeritus professors. They say, okay, you're just too old, you get to teach, but you don't get to an opinion in future development. So it seems to work.
It works, or it seems to work.
It seems to work, because if you don't put that deadline, kind of the age of the or the history of the investigators or the people voting with the most power keeps extending. It's like you get the older and older people stuck in their views. So it tends to be a centralization, because the early ones get the most power, and then there's no rotation. So and it is a problem.
I think that, even just in the last few weeks, the sophisticated understanding of these contributor tokens and their evolving nature as you contribute. I feel like we're still so early in that process. I think there's going to be ways to be even more refined and elegant about that, over the coming whatever period of time you want to say. And I don't think that we have a large enough population to make quadratic mechanics, reliable in that sense. And because for exactly the same things that A's saying in the chat. But, you guys do you. I mean, I'm just a bystander.
No, I think it's true. I have been starting to think that time is going to be really important on influence, and any amount of influence earned. And there's a lot of different scopes of influence that we're starting to think about, whether it's the case we're talking about today, which is saying whether or not stuff got done, or at a really high level, deciding the rules of some next allocation of gimbals. In both cases, personally, I would love to see a system where power or influence accrued does have a clear expiration date, right? And that there is some level of recency to how those weights work. I'll be really interested to explore that.
Maybe expiration date is kind of very some kind of passive aggressive term. I really like to use the retirement period, like after some time, you know.
You're allowed to teach, but you're too old to vote.
Exactly.
I like the way Oscar said it.
You have to force to retire and sit and become
Sure,
the
sure.
OG.
Tell me
Yeah.
stories. Yeah. But we're not really going to.
Indeed, you get some kind of governing council, some advisory part, but you don't get the vote.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you have to be nice, right? It's not
That's
expire.
yeah, it sounds like a
The
dream.
university says emeritus professor, right?
Exactly.
Is it wrong to aspire to that? Actually, that sounds really nice.
No, it's
Hey,
not wrong to become emeritus. They also leave you alone. It's like
That's right.
Emeritus token, as Alex said in chat.
Yeah, we might. Okay, that's another thing to pioneer. I like it. Hey, what do you think?
Yeah. Wait. Let me gather my thoughts. I forgot what I think. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've kind of shared majority of my my opinions in the chat there. I think for me, especially in the context of Ethereum, like quadratic is seen to be like this, like silver bullet, like, oh my God, yes, this is, this is not plutocratic, and this is for the people. And I'm like, no, it's basically just an obfuscated version of plutocratic, just in different clothing. I think I think possibly one of the issues here could be very much solved by approaching it in having just individuals take accountability. Because whilst I understand the idea of like, consensus and voting and, trying to have a meeting of the minds, I feel like from a network effect standpoint, whether it's distribution of gimbals or approving and paying out of bounties, I feel like if in the beginning it's distilled down to an individual who has a problem, who's willing to put up something of value, ADA, gimbals, whatever, for a problem to be solved, and only they get to say whether it has been solved or not, and their reputation is at stake if a whole bunch of people come along and put forward solutions after having agreed to actually solve that bounty, and the guy who put him up just sort of keeps turning solutions down. That would then go to affect their reputation, obviously. So I feel like building individual reputation first and foremost makes a lot more sense. This way, then you get a better sense of skill sets, within the community, and also just some momentum to the point where then, 2 people or 3 people can then, within a group say, hey, we're suffering from this particular problem. Let's get our heads together. Let's put together a bounty and, equally maybe put together the money in, and we'll get to vote, as to whether, whoever will have presented a solution has met the criteria kind of thing. And this, I feel like in doing it this way, you're piecemealing it in a good way, because if an individual comes along and says, hey, this is a particular problem I'm having, most likely they're doing
Hey,
that
A,
in a way.
A,
Yeah.
Did your mining rig just turn on or something? We're getting a lot of like bad noises in the
No,
background.
no, it's my battery, solar battery. One second, let me try and turn on. Oh, voice isolation is actually on. Man, it should be going off any moment now. It's just off regulating.
You've got one of those Zumbas that also mines ergo. I've heard of those.
I really know that mine's that's crazy. Yeah. So anyway, to complete the thought, I think. Oh, there we go. Having a solution where it starts with the individual, it helps the network effect, it helps with building up reputation and getting a better sense of skill sets, and also it can gradually transition to smaller groups who start to cyberpunk hacks. No idea what that's particularly leading to or in reference to, but I like it. Maybe I sounded somehow robotic as the machine was trying to like do the whole filtering out of the sound. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of my perspective, and I feel like that solves for the gimbal distribution stuff, but also for the bounty skill sets and decision making, paying out and all that kind of stuff. Hope that made sense.
But hey, a question. Don't you
Yep.
think if the people inside those group, when their reputation are at stake, they want something more than just vote, like they want some kind of reward for their contribution? So doesn't that again introduce some kind of complex rewarding system for the people who are voting? Because they might say, okay, I don't want to participate. Why? Because my reputation gets some kind of risk and I don't get any result out of it. But again, if we want to incentivize voting, again, we have to create another system of rewarding for those people. Although I'm kind of agree with the people who should, who are in that group should be responsible for the outcome of that group. But what do you think about a person who says, why should I put myself in danger or risk if I don't get, I don't know, some kind of token or gimbal or aid or whatever?
Yeah, that's very much a what's the word a valid concern. However, the way I tend to think of things is just like scale it all the way down. So like from the individual part of the thing, an individual puts up the bounty and then another individual solves it. That way I feel like from both sides, you bring down the complexity, right, or the variables. And also, there's a lot more skin in the game, right, because it's individual versus individual kind of thing. And then I think as it gradually starts to go up, as I envision it, again, it goes gradually, as I said, like from one person, they then team up with another person, then there's two people, and then they're like, okay, let's do it together. At that point, and all along, the way I'm seeing it, a bounty is put together not frivolously, but it's actually put together or put forward in a way that has what's the word? Has, for lack of a better word, business weight, right? If I'm putting, for the bounty, there's a pressure for me to actually come to a resolution once the solutions are put forward, right? Because I've committed, right? I've put the money, I've communicated what the boundaries of, what the requirements or the criteria are that need to be met. At that point, you've made a commitment, right? Whether it's, those two people, whether they're 3 or 4, however many, as I see it, right? So there's a pressure of wanting to actually get the best solution, provided they've met the criteria and actually pay out. And yes, there might be other things like reputation, etc. So I feel like in actually simplifying this, you've got a monetary exchange, right? Which is sort of like the base. And then beyond that, you've got things like historical performances where some folks might on either end, might want different kind of remuneration. Going back to the collaboration spectrum, right, where some people are more cordial, some are more competitive, some combative, that whole thing. So yeah, beyond that point, you can then add on other different bits and bobs which will matter to people, like reputation. Some might not want the monetary, some might just want, I don't know, reputation, or to do something else with the monetary, donated to charity or some other
Mhm.
thing that they might want to.
In
I
fact,
hope that kind of
yeah, it's actually
answered.
catalysts are doing this. They were doing this. I think they want to change it. I don't know. I think if you guys were PA, proposal assessor, you should have get some kind of ADA. I got 130 ADA several days ago, just because I was a proposal assessor, and veteran got more. I'm pretty sure around 300 or something ADA, as I'm aware of. So yeah, what I'm saying, Catalyst is somehow experimenting, but again, as we saw in Fund 9, it failed, to be honest. Yeah, the result for the outcome of all those around 700 projects, yeah, some of them was good, but again, at the end result of that, many of people are not happy with the Fund 9, how it end up. So yeah, the issue that we are talking about is very at the edge of governance in whole Cardano, at least in Catalyst.
Yeah, my
It
quick
became
response to that would be, to me, my criticism of Catalyst has always been scale. Like to try and make so many people happy at scale when you haven't even really figured out the basics of the technical basics, but also the social and motivation incentives. I think that's kind of where it is foundationally or so fundamentally not that solid. So, which is, it doesn't surprise me why, fund after fund, there's more people who seem to be disgruntled than happy. And I don't particularly see that. It's a bit like a rocket, right? If you're off by a few degrees, like you're gonna be way off your destination by the time you get there. And, Catalyst is definitely a rocket in this regard.
But
But yeah, thanks for listening.
is the end result to be happy? Here, for example, in our bounty here, approval. Does this approval has to be some kind of happy ending? I mean, because if you are thinking about happiness and happy thinking of not hurting some kind of, I don't know, people emotion, or I don't know, contribution, or so, for example, saying, okay, we know that you contributed a lot, but we cannot approve that. And since it's kind of bitter to say that, we have to again introduce partial approval or approval. I think although yeah, some result or end result might be happiness, but I don't think we should seek that. We should, yeah, with it is approval, it doesn't matter what emotion we will get from that approval. I don't know, maybe that's me for this. Maybe we have to put the good approval, sweet approval, and that is approval.
Yeah,
Hey,
I think if I used happy, I did not mean to use happy in my description there. Oh God, things are not
there
well.
we go.
It's
But
okay. It's okay. No problem.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well, A, what you were saying is really helpful to clarify for me. Like, yeah, at the end of the day, first of all, for the efficiency of getting things started, often just the issue we're saying, yeah, that got done. Hey, I put these tasks out there, they got done. That's going to help us start to build towards this thing. And what I wasn't thinking of yet in drafting this initial list is the reputation of the issuer role. I've been thinking so much about the reputation of a contributor, but in a distributed system, if the issuer is taking advantage of people, they're not going to get away with that many times. And so that's kind of a nice thing that's built in. And then on a roadmap perspective, eventually there will be multiple people coming together to initialize a treasury and right to be the co-issuers, 2, 3, 10, 25, it could be a lot of people. And at that point, maybe these group processes become much more important, but we don't have to rush into them. So I could see a lot of that logic. And at the same time, I still want to experiment with these, right? Like not rush in, okay, in order to get things started, is it essential to get these right? No. But from the perspective of capacity building and education, I'm still interested with this initial implementation of having some live coding sessions where somebody comes and they present the thing they've been working on and everybody there gets to give feedback on it at the very least. But maybe that's not the same thing as the formal approval process. I don't know.
But James, two things. First, do you want to introduce tier to this issuer, like tier 1, 2, 3? So issuer, for example, in tier, or let's say the section 1 can just create a bounty with a limitation, let's say 4,000 gimbal and 200 ADA. And if he proceed in that tier, he can create big bounty or big introduce big project. Also, the second thing, why not create another bounty for those 3? A bounty that if a person came up with a good approval group process, we can get this ADA and gimbal too. So creating a bounty for approval process, for instance.
So to each of those, to the first question, this DApp is going to continue to bend our brains for a while longer. And the thing to recognize is this is an open source tool that anyone can instantiate. And every time somebody instantiates it, they're going to fill it with tokens somehow. Where are those tokens coming from? Well, listen, if you're just somebody who has a bunch of ideas and is willing to pay to get work done and you create an instance, you get to be the decider. First things first, right? Like anybody else's implementation of this thing, if they just want to say, look, there's only one way for approval to happen, that is completely okay. And we should expect it when, if somebody's putting their funds on the line, they get to decide how decision-making gets done, full stop, okay? To your second point, when it comes to designing these systems, for me, this is one case of not writing it as a project or bounty description. I just want to create space for us to experiment with other options together, right? To not say, hey, here's the one plan, but instead to say, here's the collective experiment we're going to do, because we want to find out, right? Like, what does it look like for a group of people to manage a treasury? We have DAO tooling, we have multi-sig, we have the reality of what Catalyst is right now. We have so many tools to point to and so many experiences to point to. I think there's still just work to be done at this scope, right? The scope of however many people are in this Zoom call right now, coming together and saying, yeah, how do we decide? And I don't know how helpful it is to have somebody like prescribe that first. I wonder if the best way to learn about it is just by doing it together.
James, I'm trying to, my best to play devil's advocate here. In the scenario where the person's putting up their funds to utilize this system, to get work done. I completely agree. It should be their call. However, how can this system be gamed? Does that bounty, if I posted up a bounty and I put my funds into it, does that bounty earn a credential or a proof of reputation, or is there any kind of incentive to utilize this system?
Oh, good. So on the
What kind-
issuer end, you're saying, like, why would they use it from a reputation perspective?
No, what I'm asking is how could they game the system? So I could put up my own bounty, anonymously create a wallet, and then submit my own work, pay myself, so it costs me nothing, but I continue to get credentials throughout the entire system.
Ah, excellent.
Now I'm building my own
nice point.
reputation,
I
and I'm paying
love this
myself.
question. Yeah, okay, so this part, this is great, and that is a fabulous thought experiment. We should put that into the next tokenomics PBL course, for example. So this scenario you just described, a particular instance of this DApp being used by a single party just to build up their reputation, right? Sure, somebody could do that, but the thing to recognize is that the reputation gained within any given instance of this, that's still data that people get to decide what to do with it, right? And so over time, some instances will be seen as more impactful, or, you know, like a better source of experience than others. Or it's hard to predict the words people will use to talk about these things. But the idea is like, yeah, sure. Okay, you could build up that reputation, but then people are going to look at it, they're going to say, wait, all this reputation came from what project? Show me. You know, like, it looks like this all came from the same place. So that'll be interesting to pay attention to. And I think we absolutely must, just acknowledging that the data itself is not a monolith. It's a collection of information that people can still decide what to do with.
I like that a lot. That kind of comes back to what Lace Wallet is doing. It's the issuer, you know, how do you acknowledge the issuer of this credential? And in that scenario, it makes sense. What you're saying is the issuer is local, so it only carries so much weight and reputation with it. Whereas let's say it was a bounty that Gimbal Labs or the community posted, and it went through a different process to issue that credential. Same with like Lace, it goes through a certain set of criteria to get the DApp certified.
Right.
That's going to hold a lot more weight and reputation than just somebody's local. So I could see that. You can game the system, but in the end, the issuer is the same person and it's a local person. What does that really mean for you? So, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But how
Our
about
job, yeah.
good, good.
Yeah, our job is to teach people how to read the information, right? And to say, look, and it's going to take practice. I can only speak for myself in this case, but maybe some of you relate. I have a really hard time not expressing judgment, even when I'm trying not to, right? There's value judgments. It comes natural to add that. What we need to practice is showing people, hey, here's what it looks like to review the data. And we encourage you to think about what this data means to you. We can provide case studies, that kind of thing. But that's going to be a critical step as there start to be multiple instances of this.
How about building a domain-specific reputation system where, like an island, if a person is a bad actor doing something, it will just affect that island and that isolated system, not the whole DApp.
That's the goal, I think. That's a good,
Yeah,
that's a good goal.
I was just thinking the same thing. Not necessarily a ranking system to help them, read these results, because then that means we're applying some opinions, in the scoring of it, but somehow to represent, just like what Mix is saying, represent the information so that they can easily make that call. Is this what is the domain in which they're earning
Yeah.
these certificates? I like that idea. Yeah.
And the faucet project inside the course gives people an initial look at what a registration or being added to a registry can look like. And that's just a very basic case, but it's not that different from what Lace Wallet is going to do. And you can bet that we will do the exact same thing when there are more than one instance of this dApp running. I don't know what that approval process is going to be. We're going to have to figure that out together too. Speaking of a different kind of approval, right? How do we say that this instance of GPTE should go on a Gimbal Labs hosted compendium of different GPTEs out there? How do we decide, which ones factor into whatever reputation arithmetic we might end up doing? Those are going to be really interesting questions to get to look at together.
James, there is something called NFT reference in SIP 68, right?
Oh yeah, should we switch to that? I could show you some things.
And actually, we can use that for this domain specific
Yes.
reputation. We can reference to the NFT in another domain. We
That
don't need to
is
bring that
correct.
NFT to this domain that we are working.
That is correct. That's right. So that part's really exciting too. So right, the tools in step with these conversations we're having. And I hope that we're all kind of deepening our understanding of some of the really interesting work ahead. The technical part is coming along too. So that's really exciting. And yeah, compartmentalize. We talked about, just back to Curtis's earlier point, it's, I can only speak from a personal philosophy perspective, but my philosophy of these tools is that we shouldn't try to build systems where nobody can ever screw somebody else over. But if you do screw somebody over, everybody else should know about it. And maybe you only get one chance to do that, right? And if you're gonna destroy a community or something, at least your destruction should be limited to the scope of that community, right? So I think these are really exciting ideas for us to look at. Hey, what do you say? Okay, sorry.
I wanted to mention that quadratic voting, one of its drawback or weakness is civil attack. So
Oh man, yeah, we didn't come back. I meant to say.
Yeah, but if the bad actors, it is not just a bad actor. If they're bad community or kind of coming to raid another community,
Right.
that things. And I think again, there is no perfect system. At least according to second law of thermodynamics, there is no perfect system. There is none. I mean, at least in our current understanding of physics and science. So yeah, no problem. We will build it. Hey, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, before we move on to, I suppose, SIP 68, I just want to hop back to clarify on the happy point. Yeah, because words are important. I think all in all, actually, maybe a better way of putting it is positive sentiment. I think especially within an environment which has a lot dependent on network effects, things are path dependent, right? So I think in the early stages, leaning a lot more towards positive sentiment, or having results which are more positive sentiment than negative, and that happening more frequently, again in the early stages, I think that makes a lot more sense. because then network effects kick in, but then at scale, like a system is able to be more resilient to negative sentiment, right? And in a way, from an emergent standpoint, it people, the sense of ownership, people are able to kind of self-police, and provided with things like thoughtful planning and execution, and things like compartmentalizing, and thinking about all sort of different vectors of attack from an individual to a group. I think all these things, just starting from a small place and then having it in an emergent way gradually layer on, in the same way that IO and team have thought about building out Cardano, just sort of like stacking it and building more functionality in a way that scales better and helps, like, previous efforts actually help to aid future efforts, kind of thing.
Yeah. Thanks for going into this conversation, everybody, and even for folks who are listening only. If you wake up feeling really passionate about some idea or anything, please do share that later. Okay, this is really what we're here for, is to think through these things together, and to recognize that not every answer is going to be the same too, right? I think a positive outcome of any conversation like this is for there to be multiple approaches, right? Some people might go and decide, okay, I'm never going to use any sort of group approval process. What I heard here today makes me feel more confident. Let's start with just this and really focus on the issuer's reputation. And others might say, okay, well, the group part, that's really important to me. I'm going to go explore that. So a lot of possibility here. And we can always come back to this. What I'd like to do tomorrow at this meeting at the same time is look at the actual task descriptions, okay? I would like for this community to be known for writing project descriptions that make people feel like they're already learning and like they're already part of something just by reading the task itself, okay? I think there's a lot of improvement that can be done to existing bounty systems in a way that really emphasizes, the contributor and what they're learning. So we get to look at that. But first, I'd like to switch gears over to the contributor token itself. As you can see, oh, this one doesn't have one anymore. What, did I commit to something? I thought I had a contributor token. I don't know where it went. Did I sign a transaction? Is it here? Ah, there it is.
And James, really quick, you
Yep.
you didn't get booted out when I left the meeting yesterday, did you?
Nope, it
Okay,
worked.
just wanted to make sure.
Thanks,
Just wanted to
Curtis.
make sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you. All right, so yeah, the contributor token is visible in the DApp. Making it even more visible is part of the work that's proposed here. And just to be clear, this first list of projects, these are meant to be learning activities as much as anything. I'm really excited that we have some funds from Gimbal Pool to deploy some real ADA. But the point here is not for right away for Gimbal Labs to be capturing as much value as possible, but to be really using these first few tasks as ways for people to get to know the system so they can make it their own. Along the way, we get to improve from just the basic contributor token that is specified in the project itself. So if I go to the front end, nope, I'm not going to go to the front end yet. I'm just going to go into the Plutus code for this thing. project 303, bounty treasury escrow, source, and compiler. Remember that at compile time, we specify a policy ID for the access token. Okay, so in this instance of this DApp, the access token must have that policy 738EC. And if you look in my wallet at the token that we see here, testo2 GBTE preprod, it has that. I know this is probably pretty small on your screen. Does it get any bit? Does NAMI get bigger when I do that? You can just take my word for it. If you can't see this, this policy ID matches what's in that compiler. Okay, so it's a project parameter, which contributor token we're going to use for any instance. And some people might decide when they spin up a new instance of this to use existing contributor tokens. Others might decide to create their own contributor tokens. And over time, we're going to have more and more data to help with that decision making. The holders of this contributor token, does it appear that they've demonstrated the skills to work on my project? If so, I could probably just use that one. Or if I don't see enough evidence that people have the skills to contribute to the project that I want to get done, or at least maybe it's not everybody, maybe it's just a subset. What if I could set up some way to look at some reputation data and then use that to mint new contributor tokens for my new instance of a DApp like this? And to me, this is where it gets really interesting. If we could capture contribution or reputation or you know, a record of what you've done in on-chain datum, then that datum could be referenced in a minting validator in Plutus. And so if you take the case of the course completion token, for example, if the mastery levels of some contributor are all held in on-chain datum, then it's trivial to write a minting validator that says only mint if it's mastery level 4 for all 3 of these modules, for example. And what we now have is some direction in maybe how to achieve that. And this is what CIP, I have my notes here. This is what CIP 68 is really about. Okay, so I shared this link in Discord. I'll share it here as well. I've been playing around with Obsidian like a lot of other people. And I just started playing with Publish for the first time because I found this tool really helpful. I can't promise anything about this little site yet, but at this URL, just take the end of it off. I'm going to be pushing some documents that are my personal documents from time to time. Okay, and when I do, I'll let you guys know. But this just gives me a place to kind of share my thinking in progress about a couple of things. And the first thing I pushed up here is current thinking about this completion token. We've got a CIP 68. I think a lot of people have heard about it at this point, but I had to read it several times to really start to make sense of it. And it's about datum metadata, right? Not transaction metadata, which can be indirectly, but not securely referenced by a Plutus contract. It's easy to spoof it. Datum is actually right there on chain. It's harder to spoof, and it's really nice to be able to use it in contract validation. So this is the CIP, you can read it. And what I wanted to do is create a couple of things. Oh, dude, hey, good luck. So there's a Plutus contract in this repo. There's a front end. There's some minting stuff, and you can play with all of this. And we started at we started, this would typically be our ending time. It's been 90 minutes. So for anybody on like US time, if your clocks went back this weekend, just know that now we start an hour earlier than we did a week ago. But I'm happy to keep going with this, just to throw a few ideas out there. Got the repo. What I'd like to do is show you what it does. Okay, so the front end, which is linked right here, doesn't look like much yet. All right, it's very simple. And if I connect a wallet, let's see, this wallet doesn't have any contributor tokens in it, so I can't see my contributor status, and I haven't even fixed for those runtime errors yet. However, if I use the wallet that has the correct contributor token in it, yeah, Alice, there's Alice. Okay, it's this wallet. Let me try this again. Nope. Killed my server too. Let's try that. Okay, not much to see here yet, but there's a list of all these contributors, and we can look more at this in just a moment. Okay, I can connect a wallet and I can see that I hold this contributor token in my wallet. And then this being the list of all, there's just conditional rendering here to show me mine. Okay. But let's take a look at this token on Cardano scan for just a second. Policy ID looks like this. And I can search for this policy ID. That's big. Let's come back a little bit. And what you can see is that there's actually two of each token name, just with these two different prefixes, 100 and 222. This is a pair of tokens that are going to work in concert with each other. And that's why on the front end, you're really only seeing two contributor statuses, the Alice and the Gimbal. Okay. Back to pre-prod. This is not a complete implementation of CIP 68. The purpose here is just to provide a starting point and to help us all think a little bit more clearly about what it is and what it might do. And we'll follow up with the big ideas soon. And so if you read the CIP, you'll see that I haven't followed the naming convention precisely, but I'm just throwing these prefixes on here. 100 level means that that's going to be the reference token that's held at some other address. It could be a contract address. It could be an unspendable address if you want the benefits of Plutus validation, but also the immutability of metadata. Okay. The 222 token is the one held in the user wallet. Okay. So in my NAMI right here, I have the 222 contrib Alice token, and it references the 100 token. So far, so good. What questions does this raise for everybody so far? So why is this useful? I mentioned the Plutus part already, and I'm excited to see what we can do with Plutus data or inline datum, right? That is serving a similar purpose to metadata. And you can look at the front end to see how that's handled and placed here. The other thing that's really beneficial about this is that it can be changed over time, okay? Depending on the rules. So this is the initial metadata, the transaction metadata. And I assume this will change. I wanted to play around. Alpine made a nice little 3D G logo. I'm still learning how to make that render in a web page, but it's a nice little chance to learn about something. And this would be the contributor token that's held by the contributor's wallet with a name right here, or policy ID, then name. So here's 222. 3232 is 222. And then here's 100, which is the reference token. And then I'm using a different metadata key, arbitrary one, right? Just to say some other stuff about the course, right? How this token was earned. And this is what we talked about in our initial conversations about the course completion token. Instead of throwing mastery levels right here, I'm throwing in the policy ID and the token name of the reference NFT that's held at the contract address. Dagwell, what do you think?
Yeah, on the token names, when you scroll up a bit, I got a question. Just because I know I've read that CIP, I know you did a little differently as well. I was under the impression that the 721 was supposed to be switched out for the 222 key and then mint in the different metadatas. Is that not the thinking behind that?
Oh, it's very likely that you're right about that. Yeah, let's go back to the CIP for just a second. My aim wasn't to do a perfect implementation of this, but to take a first step. So this 222, yes, it is in the token name. And CIP 67 is about like what exactly is the format of this string right here? Are there going to be parentheses around the 222 or something else? So that conversation is still live, talking about asset naming. And by the way, CIP 67 also is investigating ways to move beyond the using a Git repository for the Cardano token registry, for example. Okay, so there's a few different concerns there. But when it comes to the metadata, I'm not sure. I haven't yet seen that that's being used as a key.
Well, then that's actually a lot easier. Huh,
Oh,
interesting.
and here's the thing, right? The eventual goal, and I'm not doing it, okay? I'm not doing it over here in my transaction metadata. The eventual goal is to replace this 721 metadata from the SIP 25 standard with completely on-chain datum. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to do away with this, and all the same information that goes into 721 is going to be now in datum where it can be changed. And some will say, okay, well, it was possible to update token metadata, right? You could just add a version tag and either mint or burn some tokens. But what this does is it allows us to adjust that datum with specific rules or access to who can change it without ever needing to reclaim an NFT, right? If you have an NFT, I can't change the metadata on that, right? I could change the metadata for the whole series or something. There's ways to do that. But what if I just want to change the information associated with yours? That now becomes possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the clarification on the naming structure, it really opens up the possibilities, because I'm always like, how can I get this? Maybe not one transaction, but hopefully one transaction, so we can make it just like a streamlined process where I know it's going to work, kind of make it like a functional aspect. So I really like that we have, I can just substitute with the same data that I have currently and just update fields for the naming. That's really going to open things up, because it's just kind of like a natural evolution of what we're already doing. Really excited about that, man. Thanks, James.
It's incredibly exciting, man. I can't wait to see what we do with this. So let me show you, instead of the metadata, the datum. Okay. So here's an example of what the on-chain inline datum might look like. And this, what's on my screen right here, maps to what you are seeing over here in the front end, the contrib test gimbal, okay? So we've got module 301, mastery level 4, module 302, mastery level 2, etc. The number of completed contributions is 2. Oops, and I just didn't update the front end yet. That should say token name or alias, right? And so taking all these things together, remember those 5 fields right there. Those are the 5 fields you're going to see in the datum. We have a map of key value pairs where the key is the name of the module. In this case, it's just a number, 301, 302, 303. But I made this a byte string because I'm assuming that maybe we would want to add like a more illustrative title to the name of a module than just a number, right? So that gives us the option. Then you got the mastery levels that we just saw, 4, 2, 3. We've got a number of completed contributions. Then we've got the byte string, or sorry, the hex string for the token alias gimbal right here. I'm gonna move to here. Okay, so when we then look on chain, notice first of all that when we structure data in a map like this, inline datum makes it really nice and readable, right? So yes, it was byte strings when I was just showing you that JSON file. But when we look at the Cardano CLI view, here's the number 301, mastery level 4, module 302, mastery level 2, right? There's a number for contributions and there's the name of my alias right there. And anything we do with the front end is going to need to take whatever the on-chain datum is and format it in correctly so it's visible on a page and it gives people a similar experience to looking at metadata. But remember, a year and a half ago, CIP 25 was nothing. The reason it became something is that front-end developers chose to adopt those standards to make interfaces that made that information visible. Without those front ends, the 721 standard barely exists, right? It's just, sure, it's on-chain information, but we need to work with it. So the same thing here, right? And that's what's talked about in CIP 68. And that's what's incomplete about the implementation I'm sharing with you today. I have a very, very basic front end that takes this data and it makes it look like it's, you know, some kind of coherent data for the end user. But just to reiterate one more time, this is datum that we can read in a Plutus contract. And to me, that part is really exciting. Curtis, what do you think?
So in SnapBrillia, we're using the output, out file JSON, and it actually looks pretty nice throwing it into the JSON format. But you can use jQuery, and it's very easily usable with jQuery, having the output be JSON.
Yeah.
I want to throw something in there real quick, just to touch base. It seems like in my head, we're going to be able to just like take like a normal 721 that we would normally do, take away the first 2 letters, just have token name with the 100 as a reference and mint it right under, kind of like you demonstrated. And that could also be valid as opposed to this map of key pairs. It's one of the valid metadata structures that that Cardano accepts. Am I right on that?
Yeah, definitely. I would test those ideas.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. So here's that out file that Curtis was talking about. Right. And here's how it looks here. And then, of course, what gets really exciting is that now, suppose that Gimbal here does some more tasks, right? Or levels up their mastery levels. This is what we're now able to do. So building on our understanding of reference addresses, I think, we first talked about the possibilities for reference addresses 6 or 8 weeks ago as the Vassal hard fork was taking place. And I've learned a good bit about the possibilities of reference addresses, and a lot of the things we speculated about then are true. First of all, we know we can spend UTXOs from a reference address, right? Just because a script or inline datum is stored in a UTXO, nothing stops us from spending that UTXO later, which is kind of nice, right? It means things aren't permanent unless we want them to be. You can build an address and either publicly destroy the keys or by some other method make it unspendable. You could use a Plutus contract that can never be spent from as your reference address to ensure that this datum will be immutable. You can also make a reference address from a Plutus contract with certain validation logic. And that's what I did for this first example. It's really simple, and it's going to look familiar to anybody who's been following along with this course. All we're going to do is say, hey, look, you can interact with this address if you have some admin token, straight up token gating, just like the faucet. Okay. I didn't even implement ref token to contract and check datum yet. Check datum is not complete, and ref token to contract is just not implemented. But the idea here is if you have access to updating the datum, then you can do so. Okay, and so at compile time, at compile time, we had to specify an admin policy ID and then that contributor policy ID, so that can be moved around. And then in order to update that metadata, that is an admin process, okay? So we build a transaction that spends from the reference address and then deposits back at that reference address with some updated datum. Nelson.
Yeah, can there be ways to restrict what we can change in the datum? Like in the metadata, we are going to have course provider as Gimbal Labs, right? How, like, can we make such that it cannot be changed, but other things can change?
Excellent. So this right here, this is transaction metadata, right? And this can't ever be removed from the chain once it's created. So this part, yeah, this is immutable on the 2 test tokens that I've already created. It is possible to mint new tokens with a given policy ID and then to add the version tag to the 721 part. And just because, once again, because front-end developers have adopted this standard, something like Pool PM looks for the version tag, and if it exists, chooses the highest value of the version tag. right? But that doesn't erase anything from the chain. So this is always going to be there. The question is, what about the points that we do want to be immutable? So it's such a good question, right? I think transaction minting metadata is always going to have a place because there's some things that we don't want to be able to change. Put them there, put that in the minting data. But when there's something that should change, for example, like those mastery levels we were looking at, to me, this datum solution is really helpful. Okay. So let's just take a moment to update some metadata, right? So all I'm doing here is going to run through this transaction. Just like in the course, I'm trying to like make shell scripts that don't automate everything for you, because I still want you to think through, okay, what UTXOs do we need here? What's coming in? But then it does save us some time. And I want to just use a new contributor datum file. I'm going to call this the new gimbal contributor datum. And I'm going to make a copy of the Alice datum with that new name. And it was for 4, 2, and 3. Let's say, you know, that they improved by 1 level for each. They're up to 4, 3, 4. But let's say they did a whole bunch of contributions, whatever those turn out to be. And this string right here needs to be gimbal, not Alice. There we go. Okay, so we have this updated data. We remember what it looks like on the front end right now. Here's gimbal's data. All right. And I'm just going to run this transaction. I got to pay the fees. My admin policy ID, I forget what it is EOC7. So this is my admin token. And I want to update the gimbal one, not the Alice one, right? And so as we look at this right now, I hope you're thinking about what will need to be automated eventually. And it'll be wonderful for holders of an admin token to be able to update datum from some front-end interface. That would be much easier. So it's this one is the one I'm updating with this contributor or reference asset. And it failed because my new datum file doesn't exist. Just fix that. Oh, I see why. Okay. Okay, fix that. Try that one more time. Once again, pay for the fees. The admin token looks like this. I'm going to change gimbal's data with this contributor token, and we're good. Okay. Not free, right? It's a little bit more than double a regular transaction cost to update this data. And so we should always take that into account. Let's see if it went through. Oh boy, am I still running? It says submitted, right? Let's give that a second. If I refresh this page, that's Alice's data, but over here, this is the gimbal's updated datum, 434. Now they got 10 contributions. Okay. To the end user, it still looks pretty simple. To us, we know it's on chain, and we have a pair of tokens accomplishing this. Finally, if I look at the front end, and let's just look at I can look at the whole index right now, just the whole list. Okay, I have a component called list all contribution token. And it makes a query to the contract address, okay? So the precise UTXO, it doesn't matter, right? Basically what the reference token is doing is it's allowing us to identify which UTXO we're looking at. And that's really at the core of what this proposal is about. It's saying, okay, we can put inline datum on a UTXO. Fine. How do we know which UTXO we're looking for? We're looking for the one that has this particular token in it. So we query the contract address. We actually, the TX hash and the index, the only reason I'm grabbing these in the query is so that I can create a mesh UTXO, right? It doesn't really matter for the logic of this dApp to know what those are. I guess it will once we're trying to have an update functionality. So it's good that that's there. But then we go and we say, okay, let's look through those UTXOs and find the one, all right, go look for in the assets, anyone with this policy ID, and then find the one with a matching asset name to the one you're looking for right now. Okay, so the name is the part that we try to match. Everything after the number 100 or the 222. And there's a little bit of string, JavaScript string manipulation going on in a few different places. Substring, we get rid of the number 100, for example, on the front of that ref token name. But yeah, that's the basic idea. And I think that's the extent of what I was hoping to take you through today is to then think about this query right here. I always appreciate having a first chance to try to walk through something like this. You can see I've got my work cut out for me, trying to get better at talking through this stuff, but I'm glad we get to share this with each other. So what are you thinking?
I mean, it does seem like a no-brainer for something, at least to eventually implement for the, you know, contributor tokens, and I can see you know, in the long term, I can see even more use for it, you know, with the idea of approving a bounty is completed, requiring an output transaction to change the datum at this contract address that holds these, so that you know that you're going to get your reputation increase. All these different things that this allows us to do, I think is super cool, and definitely something to start experimenting with.
Yeah, integrating that is going to be so exciting. And so, yeah, Trevor, I agree completely. One question I want to bring to everybody is there any reason not to start using this right away, right? At the end of the day, we're just minting tokens that have a policy ID. Those are our contributor tokens. So nothing's stopping us on the existing Plutus end for GPTE. And what immediately follows that for me is to then integrate it directly, right? Yes, every time a distribution transaction happens, part of that transaction should simply be updating the inline datum at the reference token. And I don't think that's going to be too hard to do. I think it's going to be really cool to prioritize that. So can anybody see any points of caution where we should hold off on using this in the initial mainnet release of GPTE? What do we need to consider?
What about the ADA that's going to be locked up with the token? Like if you're going to distribute 100 contributor tokens.
Very good. Okay. You're talking about the ADA that's locked up with the reference UTXO that has the datum on it.
Yes.
Yeah. Mick, see you soon. That is, okay. It's such a critical question. And it's one that all of us have to be ready to talk about. What is the cost of using the Cardano protocol? That's part of it. Okay. It's what does it cost to use this system? Well, if I want reference UTXOs like the ones we're talking about here, and this is a little bit higher than minimum, right? It doesn't quite have to be 1.5 ADA, but whatever it is, let's call it 1.2 or so, right? Yeah, the host of this, in order to use this system, is going to need to put up 1.2 ADA times the number of contributors to run this system. You too, Mix. See you soon.
So for the long time, like if we are going to work with multiple iterations of PPBL, maybe one time we can have maybe more than 1,000 contributor tokens, like just future.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it.
If we have 1,000 contributor tokens, we're going to need like 1,200 ADA just to kind of solidify that system.
But at that point, you need to move off chain or to a Hydra hit. And you just run the Gimbal Labs Hydra and
Bingo.
you have an escrow for all of you.
Isn't it beautiful when you see why these tools are being built the way they are? This is it, right? So yeah, doing this on mainnet is going to come to be understood as expensive, which is by design. We should be selective about what goes on mainnet. And whenever that limitation, people don't need the full security of mainnet, but have trust within their smaller system. All of the validation logic we write in Plutus right now can be used inside of a Hydra head. It just doesn't have the 3,000 block producing nodes verifying those transactions. Pretty exciting.
So I've got a couple of thoughts. One is just kind of like come to my head a few times recently, and I'm curious what other people think. But first, I'd like to ask James, what are your thoughts on? So I think it's super cool that you've got this pre-prod instance up and running, and we can like kind of play with it, submit, and have things confirmed. But how would you feel about some of us? Like I'd like to. It's been a busy week, but later this week maybe. Jump in, commit to a bounty, especially one of the ones that are, kind of more educational, that will be done multiple times, and actually do it and start to like experiment with using it. I mean, I know that it's not incentivized yet, and we don't want people doing a bunch of work without, some sort of payout. But at a certain point, like we have to experiment to start finding problems. I'm curious what your thoughts are on us just straight up using it as if it was mainnet and kind of trying to hash some of this out. But then when it comes to mainnet and the cost of running it, I'm curious what people think about. I've been thinking about as the technology matures, the idea that the cost of, we tend to view ADA as a currency, but it's really more the cost of using the system. and I start to think of like how much corporations spend on security, right? And I'm curious if people think that, you know, the extreme cost of ADA to run things on mainnet is eventually going to be far less than the massive amounts of money that people pay for security in IT or security in their internal systems to be able to run on the blockchain. I know that's kind of like two separate thoughts, but I'm curious what people think.
Yeah, security and insurance. I would think compared to the real world, I think crypto is competing more, or is more related to insurance, because the security, even with your best code, you can still face some security issues. So maybe just I wanted to add that, the insurance aspect of it.
You're also mixing the purpose. The idea of having the blockchain is to have an auditability of your process. So the reason you can say in our case, we run on mainnet is because you want everybody to know about your process. But if you say all these rewards only need to be for the Gimbal Labs community, the Gimbal Labs community runs an escrow, and then only the concerned people audit that part of the blockchain. The second thing is ADA or Bitcoin or Ethereum. I mean, at some point, all of this will not be a currency, but it's more like a fuel. It's like you just pay mostly on have the network validate something for you. And it is a feature of the system that as the system becomes more valuable, all these processes need to become more expensive. Because you're also should be fighting also for block spaces, like who gets to say this is relevant for everybody. So it goes on mainnet. And that is my feeling. I mean, cryptocurrencies, most of them should become like a fuel on the mainnet version. They might be really a trading currency within their proper layer 2s. And they have nothing to do with security. They are gold at being auditable.
Well said. Diego, what do you say?
You know, I'm listening to what you're saying. It's a lot of good points, but it also kind of brings me up to what's happening with Ethereum now after the merge, where like everyone, it's kind of going into like they're wrapping it with everything, you know, so they can use it on other chains. So kind of Ethereum is kind of like, to some extent, I don't know how it's going to play out. It's like it's losing its value in its original form. Maybe it's changing, maybe it's not. But I know we have kind of a different setup with native tokens on Cardano, but at the same time, I do fear producing tokens that have no security base kind of thought about built in somehow, because I don't want to end up with like a whole bunch of like wrapped ADA on ADA to move ADA. It doesn't make sense to me, and I'm a little apprehensive.
There shouldn't be wrapped ADA within Cardano, no matter which layer you are. There should be like, if you do it correctly in the way Hydra is, like you get still ADA on layer 2s. If you want to go cross-chain, you will always have an institution doing you the wrappings. But it feels pointless, as you say. You don't need so many tokens. I mostly start to believe all these cryptocurrencies should be like a fuel, like in the original ETH idea of being the gas. Like you just need this to run the system. And whatever goes as tokens, they will have a human representation, in the sense some tokens will be securities of companies, some tokens will be derivatives of some products, some tokens will be credit certificates, Some tokens will be mortgages I mean, the token is just a representation of something that it will be backed up by some human institution, because the blockchain on itself does not guarantee the value. At the most, the native token, which would be the ADA for Cardano, the ETH for Ethereum, the Bitcoin for Bitcoin, because that's the one you use to run the network. But that is its only value. And it will have the value people believe it needs to run the network. And they might be like water. I mean, every single one of us needs water to survive, but water is cheap because there's enough water for everybody. And we don't store our water, we just buy on the next increment. So maybe we will not be millionaires on ADA because we will just use it at the next increment and will value truly the human promises. I get food, I get a credit, I have a mortgage. So we will see in the next 10, 20 years what we make of this technology.
And I can see a use for tokens because of the ecosystem. We're trying to build out our tokenomics as well, and Hydra Head is in the plan, plus Babel fees. So we can support our community and our ecosystem purely by our token. I know it's just one of millions, but if you want to use our platform, the Hydra Head is what supports our ecosystem, and it accepts our native or our own token. And if you want to pay for fees, you can pay in Babel fees using our token. So it's, in a way, I see it as a form to create a platform and an ecosystem on top of Cardano. Using that token is what gives you access to it, and it generates value and utility as well. It's not just the same exact thing as ADA. It's actually a little bit more, because now you get access into this ecosystem, and it creates a circular value generation because they're paying for it in Babel fees. They're acquiring more, like you said, as more like a store of credit. I kind of see that turning more popular.
I love that. I love that idea. I do like the idea of ADA holding some value, because at some level, I do think it represents like the system in which it makes the value secure. I think that is, I think when you're with ADA, I think eventually you'll also be paying for the proof of work system that is so far ahead of its time. And I would like to see a process where as ADA gains value, the fees go down, because I don't really see so much of a reason to why you have to have high fees. But I do see a problem with, like, if it's just a network currency and it's kind of giving it like water, and you have selected people who know how to either put a lot of FUD or crap on the network, and now they have like unlimited tools to do so. I just think there's some other things to think about, but I do like the tokenization of assets, because as you were saying, blockchain it's a beautiful database. I think Mick said that. So processes to make sure that everything is there to be a valid credential. I'm 100% with you on there. I do want to see the base layer continue to have some value, because I think it represents a valuable system. I think everyone has a blockchain, but the way in which Cardano organizes its system with its in UTXO, I do believe it sets it apart, and I think that is valuable.
So I think, what I'm hearing here for the last few minutes, and I'm sorry Oscar left. I think that this is why, all of these reasons are why it's important to think of ADA, as a commodity, right? Its ultimate purpose is to secure the protocol, right? Ultimately, the best thing to happen would be for it all to be staked. There wouldn't be any loose ADA running around exchanges. It would just all be staked, and then used for paying the fees. And that's you know, that fits the definition of a commodity, right? You know, like gold is a commodity. You know, it's kind of treated differently now because most people think of it as just a way to hoard wealth or to back wealth. But, you know, like if our economic model was not based on planned obsolescence, then our computer boards would at their heart not have copper and alloys on the motherboards, right? They would have gold, right? Because it's like a great conductor of information and electricity. You know, and it's a great commodity in the sense of what you can do with it, and it doesn't dissipate and go away, you know, like platinum and silver and those other elements. I forget what they're called. And that's kind of what ADA is, in my view, you know. And I think it's going to be increasingly how it's treated as time goes on, because of the necessity to have it, to build out these hydra heads, to build out these side chains, to build out these communities, you know, that are going to have more and more transactions than what we're used to seeing on the blockchain.
And I think to Dagwell's point, this is kind of how I see the value of ADA playing out. It's the transaction, as the value increases, transaction fees will increase as well. I don't see a sustainable model where that's not the case. It's just everything is going to be operated on like a layer 2 solution, Hydra head, sidechain, and then be pushed into the main chain. And those fees are going to be paid by the Hydra head or by the DApp or the platform or the ecosystem that they're building. That's going to foot the bill for those high transaction fees. Say it's $10 per transaction, but that supports the SPOs, that supports the network. Without that, the incentive would be missing and we wouldn't have SPOs. But it's just going to be less common that we're going to see layer 1 transactions. Those layer 1 transactions are just going to be bundles of transactions performed on Hydra head. So it's a mutual relationship between the layer 1 SPOs and then the DApp developers potentially hosting their own Hydra. So everybody kind of gets the necessity to be sustainable. That's sort of how.
That's interesting, because I'm coming at it, I see that 100%. And I hadn't really thought about that. So I'm definitely going to give more insight. Kind of my backdoor solution is I want more people making more transactions, period. And I'm hoping that as our base grows, so eventually we have like 1 billion people, even if you're just like, you know, sending a message, you know, or utilizing these microservices, I really feel like that's going to start generating the treasury needs. And I'm hoping that we can create a system that we're planning on growth. And I know that has limitations. I see Netflix, you know, I see the consumer-based model. It does have failures, it plateaus. But I'm very interested in using growth to kind of maintain fees. I don't want to build a network that no one can use. I don't want to go Ethereum status if we can help it, but I understand exactly what you're saying as well.
So I'm kind of confused that taking this perspective, Curtis, you know what I mean? Because my understanding is neither the SPOs or the input output, that they want it to be expensive to transact. You know, that's the purpose for the Babel fees and that whole research into how to do that. The opportunities for the SPOs is not someday, you know, getting large amounts per transaction. You know, it's the opportunity for the huge volume of transactions, as well as the opportunity through Babel fees or negotiating with communities, negotiating with people who want to do Hydra heads or side chains, that they can pay for their transactions, you know, in their currency, right? So that they are collecting transaction fees in more than one crypto, you know, something besides ADA.
And Steve, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, you're good.
My apologies, Steve. No, you're right. But see, it's the model that I think is going to change, right? The SPOs are still going to be there. If you think about it, when Hydra does come out, and that allows for, in many cases, pseudo feeless transactions. A Hydra head can offer a completely feeless system because it's taking its cut somewhere along the way. Maybe it's selling an NFT to be able to access this Hydra, or it's its own DApp that they're supporting. They can say it's a feeless, and then they just pay the overhead costs that go to the layer one. As that starts to roll out more, we're going to see an extreme reduction in layer one transactions. It's just going to be those check-ins with the Hydra. And that's not sustainable for the SPOs, right? Like right now they're properly incentivized, but eventually that's going to dwindle down and it'll become a negative equity investment. They're going to be losing money on month-to-month basis. So they do have the opportunity as an SPO to participate in the Hydra head network. So they now can support these Hydra heads for the dApp developers. The dApps don't need to deploy their own stake pool and their own Hydra head. They can hire other SPOs. So that's how the SPOs are going to maintain their relevance, right? And their revenue is by participating in these additional networks. But the layer one itself is going to have to be impacted because the sheer volume of transactions is going to reduce dramatically. I think when Hydra and sidechains come in, there's not going to be much of a need. And in my opinion, when I see layer one Cardano, that is supposed to be, right, a financial system. So all we care about is the finality of the transfer of value, not meant to be a database. That's what Hydra head is for, right? Hydra head could be the database. Of course, there's metadata and datum that can contribute to the extensibility of that transaction. But I just see most of those ledger related transactions where it's just data transferring. It's not value necessarily transferring. That's going to be performed on a layer two, on a Hydra or a sidechain, and then bundled in to a layer one transaction. So as an SPO, there's still incentive for them to continue. They become Hydra head supporters. They deploy side chains. This is what our business model is based off of. We're not just a stake pool. We're also going to support Dandelion and Hydra head and sidechain and so on and so forth. And that's how we're going to get our value. But it shouldn't be 100% relied on for our layer one fees, because I think that's just going to dwindle down, especially if the fee itself reduced with the growth of Cardano. Right, like it's just going to be, I don't know. I see the majority of the transactions. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You see the majority of the transactions well.
Just shifting to more of a layer two type solution like Hydra. That's all.
I see what you're saying, and I instantly a little bit go to the batching solutions that we're done with some of the dApps or the trading dApps and whatnot, Sunday Swap and Min Swap and what. And I kind of see where that process is going, but at the same time, I kind of think that's going to be a path, but I hope it's not the other path, because it kind of seems like it's going in the face of like the autonomy and the tools that, like, for instance, I want to be able to check on a transaction level what I'm doing. Like, that's important for the kind of work that I do. And I'm not saying that, that's going to dictate the whole ecosystem, but I do think there are people who value using transaction bases, not only for like just to have a record, but to have that personal touch. Sometimes you're sitting in batches, you don't have as much control. So I just don't think that's going to be the whole thing. I still think that the transaction fees that you make to interact with signing a transaction, pretty much almost anywhere, it's kind of hard to give stuff away for free. I think that 0.2 or that 0.17, I think that's always going to be a thing, because like, even when you have a large amount of people like batching, like it's still like a purpose batch. Like, hey, we're producing this Hydra head for you to be able to do this instance and whatnot. I still don't think that takes accountability to individual, like sovereign, decentral path that I hope a lot of people are going to take. I hope people are going to start busting up these instances that we're making right now everywhere, because it seems like if not, if you just have a couple of places like having a Hydra head that has a bounty system in it, it just seems like that's kind of opposite the point. So I see what you're saying. I hope not.
I see.
Did you
I see
guys-
where. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
It was like 4 or 5 days ago, and I don't even know why it came up on my radar, but there was a video from Sebastian at DC Spark, and he was sketching out what DC Spark is working on and what he thinks should be worked on with these different layers, you know, the layer 2s, and he was talking about a storage layer. Have y'all seen that? You know, because I've found that to be kind of illuminating for me, you know, in this topic that y'all are addressing. Did you see it, James?
I didn't watch that one. Do you have a link to that?
Yeah, I was just
trying
going
to.
to.
That was my problem. I'm trying to figure out how I even saw it, because I'm, you know. I'll let me look.
I
I'll
think
look
it
right
was
now.
YouTube. I did watch it. I did watch it, Stephen. I agree. Well, we should recommend everybody to watch it. And Dagwell, so to your point, that's still going to be possible. I think what you're envisioning is an Ethereum type solution, where layer 2 is a distant relative to Cardano or layer 1, right? Whereas in Hydra, that's not necessarily true. So something like Dandelion, potentially, you could use a service like Dandelion to query those layer 2s to get that same level of information and detail in complexity as you would layer 1. You're not putting a shield over it, making it more difficult to obtain that information. It's still queryable. You're just querying the layer 2, and you could use a service like Dandelion to do so.
Oh yeah, and don't get me wrong, I love that, and like we're looking at Hydra heads too. So don't get me wrong, man. I'm not, in no way am I trying to like stifle any kind of innovation at all, because I do believe that they all are necessary in order to build the ecosystem that we want. I just think I think it's gonna be hard as hell to replace going to a website, connecting your wallet, and buying it, like in doing that transaction. I think on some levels, being able to just interact with like you and the app, and I know we can make it like that on the front end. I'm just hoping that more people, I'm hoping to see more individual people being able to spin out what they want and offer a different flair. And I just get a little nervous that sometimes it's the only people who are offering, like, okay, we're all kind of going to layer 2, and now you got to know somebody to get your same product out and make sure that the fees are taken care of. You have your Babbage coins and all that stuff. I just think that for the safety of the everyday user, I'm going to keep developing methods where I got a one-on-one connection, like that enables people to use it for whatever wallet they want, blah, blah. But who's to say that those one-on-one connections won't have a back in the Hydra head? So I do want to make that clear that I love where you're going with this, man. I'm just kind of doing a little devil's advocate, because I also really respect the individual lane that you take when you get to, in some aspects, create, you can hold an NFT and create it and use your own financial means on a one-on-one without having to rely on anyone to get away from the banking. That's kind of where I'm at, little devil's advocate, but I hear what you're saying, and it's needed as well.
How
Yeah,
lucky are we to be here? So cool.
I apologize if I've sounded argumentative, Dagwell, because I'm completely in alignment with what you're saying. 100%.
Me too, bro. Bro, come on, bro. No, I need to hear this stuff. Don't get me wrong, bro. Sometimes I come, you know what I'm saying? But what you're saying, it's dead fucking on, bro. Like we have to have these conversations. And like, if there wasn't somebody thinking about like batching in a layer 2 situation and my solution was the only solution, we'd be fucked. Excuse my language, but we'd be screwed, So like, bro, much love. That's all I gotta say. James, if you could edit that out, please, it'd be great.
Which part? What are you talking about?
No fun. I love it.
And I usually look for a part in these videos where we just cut off the end to not keep some of this stuff just ours. Actually, speaking of, let me stop this right now.